In studio by a GOP-endorsed gubernatorial candidate, Jeff Johnson.
Good morning.
Good morning and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great weekend. We left that convention more enthused and united than I can remember any convention I've been at. It was great.
Did expectations, and not so much of getting the endorsement, but just expectations of the convention as a whole, did it match what your expectations were going into it? Did you walk out of there going, well, that was a little different than I expected? Talk a bit about just the overall experience.
Yeah, it matched my hopes of what it would be, but we didn't know. You just don't know going into these things. There were still a lot of undecided delegates walking in there, and certainly swayable delegates. And there was a pretty intense effort for a no endorsement. Pawlenty had his operatives running all over the place and trying to convince people to do that. And the fact that we got through it in 3 ballots, and the other 2 candidates threw their support behind me, and we got an acclamation and no endorsement, ended up getting like 3% in the end. Mm-hmm. It was fantastic. So it was what I was hoping for. Let's put it that way.
Now, this is obviously a repeat performance for you. Last governor's race, very, not very similar, but similar circumstances. You went in there, you earned the endorsement, and then you were challenged in the primary. Talk a little bit about what you learned last time around about specifically this portion of the process, and are you going to do anything differently this time? You did go on to win the primary last time.
Yeah, I'm going to do a lot of things differently this time, and we already are doing a lot of things differently this time. And this primary obviously is dramatically different than 4 years ago, because there were 4 of us in the race, and I think most people considered me the front runner in that race because of the endorsement, and I think I'd raised more money than anyone else, or at least had more cash on hand. And this is different with Tim. I think I'm probably seen as the underdog in this race. Generally, the biggest lesson I learned and the biggest change has to do with the general election, and that is Republican turnout. We went after aggressively independents because after that primary, I had spent 15 months seeking Republican votes almost solely. Mm-hmm. And then we had to go out and convince independents, tell independents who I was, and then convince them to vote for me. It worked. I beat Dayton by 10 points with independents, but Republican turnout was just dismal, and that was the biggest problem in the campaign, and that was a very painful lesson to learn. So 2 things during this primary: not only do I need to go beat Tim, but I also need to make sure I'm working those independents earlier so we don't have to do it quite as intensely. And then I've got to make sure Republicans around the state know who I am in the general and are excited to get off the couch and go vote.
We've talked about this before during caucus time, but it rings true when it comes to the convention, of the people that go to the convention, and how into it they are, obviously being so involved in the process, they're taking time out to go there. How much of that have you seen any difference in terms of attitude of convention goers versus when you're outdoor knocking? Do you think that the convention goers themselves are very representative of the energy that is out for individuals that don't get as involved with the people that go there?
No, I think there's definitely more interest and excitement amongst activists just because they're more informed and they're engaged all the time, whereas your general public or even a lot of your Republican primary voters are probably just starting to get engaged. They saw the news of the endorsement. This might be the first time they start thinking about the race. And so that is going to give Tim an advantage early on with, there's going to be a lot of Republicans who are just looking at this and saying, oh, nostalgia, I remember Tim's name. So he'll probably do well early on. We just need to chip away at that over time. But I can tell you the excitement of people paying attention is much higher than it was 4 years ago. It's pretty cool.
Talking on issues and policy wise for a moment, what do you think really made your campaign, your platform stand out above the others at the convention? Were there specific issues that you brought up that really seemed to resonate?
I don't know that there was an individual issue, but I think my overall message really resonated, and it's resonating with non-political people all over the state, and that is that we have to just fundamentally change government because our state agencies have become arrogant and the system has become broken. The session ends the same chaotic way every year. We're throwing everything into these huge omnibus bills, and the agencies like the DNR, the PCA, or the Met Council have decided that their job is to control people or tell people how to live their lives as opposed to serve them.
It does feel like we're being governed more by these boards. We're being governed more by unaccountable bureaucracies than we are by the people that we're electing and voting and sending into office. That's sort of the evolution of the Dayton administration.
Absolutely. And it is, I mean, it's been going on even longer than that, but it has become even more obvious the past 8 years, I think. I mean, we have our own little deep state right here in Minnesota, and we can't fix the specific political problems in this state until we change that culture, and that is going to require a bit of a house cleaning. We need to get rid of people who don't get that their job is to serve people.
651-989-5855 is the phone number. You can also use the hashtag TCNT on Twitter if you have a question. Of course, Minnesota GOP does endorse Jeff Johnson for governor's race. Joins us in studio. A lot of chaos on the DFL side. Do you pay attention to that at all? Are you looking at that at all? Do you? I mean, I guess how much does that, if any, have an impact moving forward, or is that something, you know what, I'm not going to worry about that right now?
Well, there's nothing I can do about it.
Sure.
I mean, I read about it and it makes me happy and excited because I think it,
as it does us.
yeah, and I think it's. You know, it's kind of interesting because going into this convention, the media was all talking about how we were going to be disunited and messy on the Republican side, and the Democrats had it all figured out.
They weren't covering that at all.
Right.
There was no coverage on the DFL side going into the convention.
And their convention was a train wreck, and now their primary is going to be a train wreck too. We don't even know who's going to get in at this point, and so I think that's great. I think it shows. I think that will be a noticeable difference. And honestly, when I look at where we're at, I think Tim should get out of the race. I don't even know if he's in the race yet officially, but his pretense for getting in was that no Republican is catching fire. And we walked out of that convention the most united and enthused any convention I've ever been at, including 2002 when I stayed up all night to help Tim get endorsed. And the DFL is in utter chaos, so we could spend this summer united fighting them and pointing that out to people and telling them what we're going to do versus them. Or Tim could force this primary and we could be disunited and spend a bunch of money and time fighting each other. And I think it'd be much more likely that we don't win. So if this is really about the cause and the good of the party, I would suggest that he'd not be in the race.
We don't know what the DFL primary is completely going to look like at this point, but we do know the endorsed ticket obviously is Aaron Murphy and Aaron May Quaid. Given that you are the endorsed ticket for the Republicans, give you your first opportunity to sort of make your case to the general public against that ticket, you know, assuming that you guys go on to be on the ballot in November.
Well, that would be the most left-wing ticket I think they've ever had. I mean, I didn't think they could top John Marty in 1990, whatever, but this is John Marty times 5 or 10. And, you know, I haven't mentioned my running mate yet since she announced hers today or yesterday. Donna Bergstrom is a former lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve. She led a battalion down in Panama, and she is a former guardian ad litem, and she's getting her teacher's license. Just an amazing woman. And
yeah, but Aaron May Quaid sat on the House floor for 24 hours.
It was like a long time.
That is her biggest accomplishment.
That was a lot of sitting.
She sat.
Yeah.
In a spot.
So I
sometimes alone.
Well, not when the cameras were there. There were people jumping over them to sit down next to her. But I think whether it's that endorsed ticket or whether it's Walz and Flanagan or whoever it is, this is going to be such a clear and easy contrast for people in Minnesota versus where do you see Minnesota going? Do you want it to be about people, or do you want it to be about government and government making decisions for you?
Yeah, and we obviously want to continue to talk about the GOP side of things, but just out of curiosity, you know, talking about that chaos on the DFL. There's probably no way to directly link it, but I can't help but look at Governor Mark Dayton and what he did with the legislature and all the work that happened, causing just in the minds of those on the DFL confusion of not knowing how to look at his actions, right? Because, I mean, look, what he did was confusing and a bit chaotic. Yeah. And to me, there's a perhaps sort of a subconscious link that leads to what we saw happen at the DFL convention going into it. Because if anything, you know, he did not set a good table leading into that convention with his actions.
Right, and when the leader, and he's the leader of their party, when the leader of your party seems to be clueless and is creating chaos everywhere, that's actually a pretty good point. Why would they do anything but follow that?
Right.
And we've gotten used to that, unfortunately. Every session ends in chaos. And that was actually before Dayton, but it's gotten even worse because he's such a poor leader. And that has to change. That's not a partisan issue. People are just so tired of this system that we have where it's a handful of people behind closed doors and at midnight every single session making the deal, and then no one even knows what's in these monster garbage bills that come out. That has to change.
How do you manage that, though? Let's put you, hypothetically in the governor's office now, and if you've got a legislature that is a majority of the other party, which it currently isn't, but let's say hypothetically, how do you avoid as governor that end of session chaos when you're trying to work with the legislature from another party?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you have to make it crystal clear up front what you're willing to sign and what you're not. And Mark Dayton always says he does that, but then he changes his mind 16 times, so no one knows really what he thinks. And I made it really clear that I'm not going to sign any omnibus bills that I believe violate the Constitution, which has been many of them the last 10 years or so, and that I am not going to sign bills that aren't posted for the public to see at least 48 hours before the debate begins on the House or Senate floor. So that's a starting point. But then you have to engage in leadership, and you have to start at the beginning of the session rather than say, well, I'm going to let them work it all out and criticize them, and then when they send me something, we'll start discussing this. You got to be there engaging both sides from the start. And we don't have to put up with this anymore.
I feel like the presence of Tina Smith was definitely missed this past legislative session because by all accounts, that was a role that she played. And I've heard from Republicans and Democrats that she played that role pretty well for the Dayton administration in the past, and obviously with that presence being gone, I think that contributed a lot to how ugly this session ended. We do have a call as a question. 1-989-5855 is the phone number if you want to talk to GOP endorsed gubernatorial candidate Jeff Johnson. Dan in Hopkins. Good morning.
Hello, gentlemen. Congratulations, Jeff.
Thanks, Dan.
Way to go, man. I really sense more of a, not that you didn't before, but more of a fire in your belly this time, and I'm really excited to get behind you and support you. And
thank you.
I'm out of breath.
Yeah, no, you're so excited that you can't even breathe.
I'm a plumber, and I'm running back to the van talking to you rather than doing my plumbing work. But I guess is there any chance to rally Keith Downey or anybody else to get behind you, or?
Believe me,
Donald Trump?
I will be working on Keith Downey, Donald Trump, and everybody in between because again, we need to be united. And I've talked to Keith, and I'm not sure where he will be, but I've certainly reached out as I have with Philip and Mary, and I think that they're going to be a big Philip Parrish and Mary Giuliani Stevens. I think they will be a big help, and we will do everything we can to get Donald Trump's support and a visit to Minnesota because I think that would be a huge help.
Does in the past, it seems like during the primary, though, I would assume a lot of those sort of national figures would probably stay out during the primary, or do you expect or will be seeking that sort of support from outside of Minnesota during the primary process?
Yeah, no, we'll seek that support. Usually they stay out, although we are seeing kind of a long lineup of establishment national Republicans who are supporting Tim, just kind of coming out. I saw Newt Gingrich said something the other day, and we've just, we've kind of seen a long line of that. I think that will continue, but I think there'll be interest in this race. I think this will be a higher profile primary than we've had maybe ever in Minnesota.
The caller mentioned a bit more fire in the belly, and I echo that sentiment. I agree with that call. How much of that, you mentioned it earlier, Tim Pawlenty entered the race saying he just didn't see a Republican that was really lighting things on fire. How much did you take that personally? And how much did that sort of light that fire in the belly, to have somebody like a Tim Pawlenty come out and say, I got to enter this race because I just don't see anybody that can win. That had to sting a little.
Yeah, well, I don't take anything personally in this business, or I should get out because it would make my life miserable. So I didn't take that personally at all. I mean, that was all part of a political calculation. He has known he's getting in this race for over a year. I'm confident of that, and he had to come up with a reason. so that doesn't bother me, and I have heard that from other people too. I think that it is a different race, and I'm running for the same reasons I was running 4 years ago, but I'm probably doing a better job of making people understand that and understand the emotion behind it, because this, it is somewhat of an emotional business, and voters vote on their emotions. They want things to change.
Absolutely.
They don't just want to make things more efficient. They want things to change.
GOP endorsed candidate for the governor's race, Jeff Johnson, joins us in studio. Do you have time to hang out through another segment?
We don't,
Nope.
because we've got a press conference over at the Capitol. I'd love to.
Then let's squeeze in at least one more call before we let you go. Patty in Forest Lake, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Jeff voted for you this weekend. It was a great convention.
Thank you,
A lot
Patty.
of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
It was. I'm putting up your signs today in my front yard.
Awesome. Thank you. Never too early.
No, it is never too early. How are we going to get rid of Pawlenty? He was on the news yesterday. He was so arrogant. I wanted to slap the grin off his face.
Patty,
We don't endorse that, Patty.
stop holding back.
No violence in this
No, no,
campaign.
no.
Tell us how you really feel.
No, that is my goal now, not to slap him across the face, but for the next 12 weeks to make it clear that there's a fundamental difference between us.
Goal
And
to have.
the primary voters need to know that.
David in Belle Plaine, go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, I just wanted to encourage you. The biggest difference between you and Tim is that when he was last governor, that he was referred to as Governor Green Jeans for his stand on his belief in global warming and trying to put carbon caps on Minnesota and pushing the light rail. That's a really big difference between you two guys, and I'd really emphasize that fact.
It is a very fundamental difference, and his green energy mandates that polled really well, which is why he supported them, have shot up electricity rates in Minnesota for average Minnesotans. And I think this era of doing things because they make politicians look good that hurt real people has to end, and that's a big difference between us.
Before we let you go, given that I don't think anybody anticipated, certainly not the local media because they didn't talk about it, the chaos that erupted in the DFL convention. With that happening, do you think that changes the views on the GOP side of the fact that Tim Pawlenty skipped the convention? I mean, because now we are coming out of this with this, we said it many times, this unity sort of message that didn't really exist before. But when you look at what happened on the DFL side and the fact that, Tim decided not to seek the endorsement, do you think that shifts people's minds or reinforces some of the opinions they might have?
I think absolutely. I think it shifts people's minds because I think even a lot of Republicans just assumed that we were going to go in, kind of be a mess, and that, Tim's people were going to come in and maybe block an endorsement or at least have some success at that. And there was no interest whatsoever. And the fact that we are probably in the best place we've been in a governor's race in Minnesota in a long time coming out of that convention. It really, I think a lot of people are taking note of that and saying, you know what? It would really be nice if we didn't have a primary and we didn't fight all summer long. And that one's up to Tim.
Jeff Johnson, again, congratulations. Give out your website contact information if people want to get involved, donate, however they choose to support you.
JohnsonForGovernor.org. You can get a hold of me or any of us that way, and we would love to have support in any way. This is a grassroots campaign. We need people.
Yeah, you're going to embark upon traveling around the state starting today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably starting in a couple days. I'm going to raise a little money for the next couple days.
Is the 2011 Jeep downstairs, or did you bring another vehicle here?
Yeah, I rode with him. We're trying to save miles on that.
Again, congratulations, and thank you guys
for coming to the studio.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.